Hi and welcome to another narration presented by yours truly, Cryptid's Roost. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to tap that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time we upload new videos. I would like to reach out and say a huge thank you to those of you who have supported Cryptid's Roost financially. We pray the good Lord replenishes you abundantly, and to those of you who will later on. We pray the Lord bless you as you do so. And also a huge thank you to everyone for always supporting the channel with your likes, comments and shares as well. It is all very much appreciated. God bless you all. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. Dying to Live. Part 1. This epic mini-series is written by getyaisha. If you would like to read more of their works, the Reddit link to their profile will be below in the description. I'll never forget the first time I met her. I wish I would have just kept walking. Who knows how much better my life would have turned out if I had. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being rude. My name is Martin and, I'm Immortal. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Unfortunately, it comes at a price. In order for you to understand, I have to go back to the day it all started. I was 12 years old at the time. Back then, things were a lot different. Kids could walk home alone without fear of some paedophile snatching them up to do God knows what. Don't get me wrong, those types have always been around. But back then, I guess it wasn't so prevalent. Anyway, I missed my after-school bus, so I was forced to walk home. It was raining that day, which was great for me, because I'd always loved the rain. The school I went to wasn't far from my house, but on foot the trip took close to an hour. In any case, I just made it to the halfway point, which was an overpass I had to walk under to get to my neighbourhood. That's where I met her for the first time. I honestly didn't see her at first. I'm still not convinced she didn't just materialise behind me, and considering what I now know, I'm inclined to believe exactly that. I'd just passed one of those big metal junction boxes when I heard her voice. "Hey, do you live around here?" When I turned around, I locked eyes with the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. Even at that age, I knew there was something different about her. I swear her skin seemed to almost glow in the shadow of the overpass. She smiled and shrugged her shoulders. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. We just moved into this neighbourhood and I don't know my way around." She made me nervous. I remember stumbling my words trying to talk to her. Yeah, what street do you live on?" She shot me this little smirk and her eyes lit up. I don't know if it's just me recalling it wrong, but I remember her eyes literally getting brighter, but only for a second. Then she blinked and they were back to normal, and she let out a sigh of relief. "Burke, if you can get me there, I can do the rest." The street she was looking for was 2 blocks over from my house. Since we had to pass right by it, I decided to drop off my backpack along the way. When we got to the yard, she stopped and stood near the curb while I ran inside. I'm an only child. My mother worked a lot, so she wasn't home, and my father passed when I was 3, so I had my own key. When I got back, she was still standing at the edge of the yard, staring at the house. She had this odd blank expression on her face, till I closed the door, and then she snapped out of it and smiled at me. When we got to her street, she smiled and thanked me, then walked off. I didn't realise it till I got home, but she never told me her name. It was months before I saw her again and found out her name was Marissa. This is where things got weird. It was summer at this point and it was blazing hot outside, but that wasn't going to stop me from riding my bike. I was cruising through the neighbourhood, headed for the trails near the railroad tracks. That's where everyone used to go because there really wasn't many places to hang out. I was 2 blocks away when I saw her. She instantly smiled and waved, so I rode over and stopped. While we were talking, I spotted an old man walking towards us with an angry look on his face. He was wearing a dark coloured suit and tie, which I thought was insane considering how hot it was. When Marissa saw him, she rolled her eyes. "It's my dad. Shit, I have to go. See you around, Marty." As I watched the two of them walking away, I realised neither of them were sweating. Something about that got stuck in my mind. I didn't see her again for 6 years. I was 18 and honestly, not much had changed in my life. Art and writing were how I spent the majority of my time, and on occasions I would walk to the movie theatre. They used to have Midnight Madness at the theatre every Friday night. That's when they would show horror movies and have employees dressed up like characters from whatever movie was playing that night. They would pop up in the audience or come running through the aisles. It was great. The movie let out a little after 2 a.m. It was a good way from home, but it was always a straight shot and I knew the trip by heart. On the first part of the walk, I had to pass by a small wooded area. It only took up 3 blocks, then I would cross the small bridge over the bayou. When I got to the bridge, I stopped to tie my shoes and I heard her voice. "Hey Marty!" I turned to see her face and nearly shit myself. She was still a kid. She smiled and held up her hands, trying to calm me down. "Don't freak out. I don't have time to tell you everything. I'm so sorry about this, but I can't let them have it." Marissa stopped and grabbed my hand. My entire body went cold and then my ears started ringing. She screamed so loud I could feel it vibrating through me. I tried to pull my hand away, but I couldn't break her grip. Her screaming got louder and louder, and then she stopped and collapsed. I didn't know what to do. I was panicking. Picking her up, I tried to run the rest of the way home to get help. But after a few steps, her body started dissolving in my arms. Before I knew it, I was covered in a flesh-coloured slime. I completely lost it and sprinted the rest of the way home. My mother was asleep, so she didn't hear me come in. I got straight in the shower and scrubbed myself raw, trying to get the image of what I'd just seen out of my head. Once I was convinced I was clean, I put on fresh clothes, but when I went to gather up the ones I'd taken off, there wasn't much left. Whatever that stuff was, it turned everything it touched to a fine powder. After I cleaned the mess, I tried to go to bed. In hindsight, I should have called the police, or told my mother, but I wasn't thinking like that at the time. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't feel well. I spent that whole weekend balled up in bed. By Monday, I wasn't feeling much better, so I wound up staying home. It wasn't long after my mother went to work before things started happening. At first I thought maybe I was loopy from the fever. I kept finding myself doing the same things over and over. I couldn't control it. I must have taken 3 showers that day. When it finally died down, I started blacking out. Waking up in different rooms, doing different things. I would wake up using the restroom, or in the garage going through the big freezer. I even woke up cutting the grass at one point, and I hated mowing the yard. I was sick for close to a week. When I was finally feeling better, my life took a downward spiral. My mother lost her job, then we lost the house and wound up living with my aunt Gretchen. I had to change schools, which didn't bother me that much. I still saw the few friends I had on the weekends, but being the new guy is always an issue. Things progressively got worse, and by the time I was ready to graduate, I was pretty much homeless. My mother and I were both working, but it seemed like no matter how much we made, it was never enough. After high school, I got a full-time job. College wasn't in my future. My mother did the best she could, but a car accident left her disabled, and every dime I had went to taking care of her. When she eventually passed, I slipped into a deep depression. I managed to maintain my job, but the walls were closing in. I was alone in my shitty little efficiency apartment, thinking the world would never know if I was gone. I wouldn't care either way. It didn't happen overnight. First I thought about it. For a long time I thought of all the different ways to kill myself, but none of them really stuck. Then I bought a gun from a local pawn shop. I toyed with the idea every night for weeks on end, till one night I got sloppy drunk and decided that would be the night. I sat on the edge of my blow-up mattress, holding the pistol in my hands. I took a deep breath, put the barrel to my temple and pulled the trigger. There was an explosion of light and sound, then cold unending darkness. But I wasn't gone. I could taste gunpowder and smell my charred flesh. My body wouldn't move, but I could definitely feel it. For a moment I thought I was blind. I thought maybe I'd failed at this just like everything else in my life. Then I saw her. Marissa was in front of me, floating in the darkness. She smiled and waved, then pointed up. Glancing upwards, I saw a blinding white light and felt a hard thump in my chest as my heart started pumping again. I heard her whisper, "Don't let them have it." Then I sat up, gasping for air. There was blood and bits of skull and brains splattered everywhere. The spot I'd slumped over in was holding a congealing pool of the mixture, squirming with maggots, and the room smelled awful. I got up and went to the restroom. When I looked in the mirror, my face was covered in dried blood, but the wound was gone. I'll spare you the details of washing maggots out of my hair or taking a dump after however long I was gone. Needless to say, I'd lost my job, and the only reason I hadn't been evicted was my landlord, Seth, smoked meth and was almost never around. Over the next few days I tried to rationalise what happened, but I couldn't. There was no way to explain it. I managed to get another job as a maintenance man in a local office building. The pay was shit and the hours were horrible, but after a couple of weeks I was able to pay rent and life started getting back to normal. One night while I was walking home, I stopped at a little deli to grab a bite to eat. I was waiting on my order when a woman came in. There was nothing out of the ordinary about her, but for some reason she kept looking at me. Feeling a little creeped out by the situation, I tried to ignore her till my order was ready, and the second it came up, I was out of there. I'd walked maybe a block or so before I heard someone calling out, "Excuse me! Hey! Wait!" I turned around to see the same lady jogging towards me with something in her hand. I almost ran till I noticed what she was carrying. It was my wallet. She waved it in the air and made her way to where I was standing. "You dropped this. You should be more careful. A lot of people wouldn't have given it back." Handing it to me, she smiled and I thanked her. She told me her name was Deborah. We talked for a minute or two, then parted ways. When I got home, I checked my wallet. I'd had $30 in it before, but now there was close to $500, and a sticky yellow note that read, "Take care of yourself." A week later, I was at the grocery store picking up a few things when I ran into her again. This time, she was with an older guy. I was picking out some fresh fruit when they walked up to me. "Hey Martin, long time no see. How have you been?" When I turned to face them, the man was glaring at me with a look of disapproval or something. Brushing it off, I put on my best fake smile. "Hey, Deborah, right? I've been okay. How are you doing?" She seemed pleased that I remembered her, but the man she was with kept giving me that same sour look. "Don't mind him. This is my Uncle Gary. He looks at everyone that way. Anyhow, I'm glad I ran into you. There's a meet and greet going on at the community centre. You should come. There's going to be a lot of people there. I can introduce you to a few. You really shouldn't be alone all the time." My first thought was, how did she know I spent most of my time alone? Me being me, I just chalked it up to just general observation. We exchanged numbers and I finished shopping, but the entire time I was in the store, I felt like I was being watched. Later that evening, I was at work covering the night shift for someone who didn't show up. I just started cleaning the second floor lobby when the elevator opened. I stood still for a moment, then called out to whoever was in there. "The building is closed for the night. You're going to have to come back tomorrow." No one responded. For a second time I thought it may be my supervisor, Carl. He would play pranks on the night shift from time to time, and this kind of felt like something he would do. Normally the doors were closed fairly quickly, but as long as I was standing there, they stayed open. Slowly easing my way over, I expected Carl to leap out and scream, but when I was able to get a look inside, it was empty. Stumped by what was happening, I pressed the call button and went back to cleaning. Near the far end of the first hall, there were a set of offices that had been empty for a while, so no one bothered to clean that area. From where I was standing, I could see the lights on in one of the offices that was supposed to be empty. No one told me about new tenants, but that didn't mean much. Carl was a bit on the forgetful side when it came to things like that. I strolled down to ask whoever was in there if they wanted me to clean, but before I could get to the door, the lights inside turned off and a man stepped out. I couldn't really see him that well at first, but as he got closer I recognised him. It was Gary. He stopped and gave me that same sour look, then smirked. "Aren't you Deborah's friend?" I nodded, and he reached out to shake hands. The moment we made contact, he narrowed his eyes at me, and for a split second they lit up before he let go and stepped back. "You seem familiar to me. Have we met before?" Nothing about him rang any bells for me. Before the grocery store, I'd never seen him a day in my life. I told him we hadn't, but he insisted we had. He mentioned places and events I had no memories of. He knew things about me, like where I'd grown up and my mother's name, but I had absolutely no clue how. By the end of our conversation, I was completely confused. Once he'd gone on his way, I couldn't get it out of my mind. The rest of the night flew by, and before I knew it, I was back home, dozing off in front of the television. A few hours later, my phone buzzing in my pocket woke me up. "Hello?"
"Hey Martin, it's me, Deborah. I was just calling to see if you wanted to go to the meet and greet. I can pick you up if you need a ride."
I didn't want to go. I was about to tell her no when it happened. I could hear myself telling her I would love to go and what time to pick me up. I wasn't in control of my body. The moment I hung up the phone, everything went back to normal. I sat there in shock. I hadn't felt anything like that in years. I spent the next few hours lost in my own little world, trying to put the pieces together. Before I realised what time it was, Deborah was calling from the parking lot. I hated the idea of going to the gathering, but I didn't want to be an arsehole about it, so I went. The moment we stepped into the building, I wanted to go home. After an hour or so, I started to relax and we had a drink while staying by myself at one of the tables. It wasn't long before Gary came over and took a seat across from me. "Glad you can make it. There's someone I want you to meet." He waved a nice looking lady over to the table. "Martin, this is Stephanie. She's the hiring manager of my office. I've told her all about you and she has an offer. I'm going to get drinks for the table. I'll be right back." With that, he excused himself and walked away. Stephanie smiled, then took a seat. "I guess I'll get straight to the point." She laughed, trying to lighten the mood a little. "No one wants to talk about work while they're at a party. Just come by the office and I'll give you the details." "So, how do you know Gary?" When I told her how we met, she gave me an odd look. Before she could respond, he came back with 3 drinks. Stephanie smiled and took hers, then excused herself and walked away. Shrugging it off, Gary passed me a drink, then told me he would be back as he was called away by someone waving him over. Taking a sip, I got up and walked over to the bulletin board that was covered in flyers and different evening postings. Most of the things on the board were old, some going back years. I was pretty sure no one used things like that anymore, but it was still kind of fun to look at. While I was standing there, I started feeling lightheaded and dizzy. Rubbing my eyes, trying to clear my vision, I shook my head, literally attempting to shake it off. I turned around to look for Deborah. Everyone in the room was staring at me. When I tried to speak, What is everyone looking at? My words came out slow and distorted. Out of reflex, I glanced down at the cup in my hand, realising I'd been drugged. Then everything faded to black. When I came to, I was lying in a bed. I wasn't tied up or restrained, but I had no idea where I was. There was no furniture other than the bed. Floor to ceiling, the room was painted a bright yellow. Something about that colour made it hard for me to think straight. I couldn't form complete thoughts as long as my eyes were open. I had to lie there with them closed just to keep myself from losing my mind. I don't know how long I was in there. There were no windows, no clocks, and the lights never went off. During the time I would have my eyes open, I would try to escape, but I kept forgetting why. I would get distracted or just outright wind up doing something else. Finally, after what I could only assume was days, a speaker hidden somewhere in the room chimed and a familiar voice spoke to me.
Hello Martin, I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a special little girl who was given a gift. Something so magnificent, if anyone were to hear about it, they would want it for themselves. The problem was, the girl was too young to understand the gift. It was given to her much too early in her life. The thing about this gift that makes it so special is it can only be used in death. Unfortunately for the little girl, she was born into the wrong family and she died young. When the gift brought her back and she was stuck as a child, for years her parents kept her locked away, not knowing what they had. Eventually they died and she was left all alone, locked in a hidden room behind walls of their home. She was discovered 6 years later alive and not a day older. When she was found, the first thing she did was run away. The girl vanished and took the gift with her. The family reported the incident to the police, but she was never seen again. That's where you come in, Martin. We believe she gave it to you, and we want it.
It was Gary, but every word out of his mouth just shoved more questions into my brain. All I could think of were the last words Marissa said to me. Don't let them have it. I yelled and cursed, telling Gary I would never give it to them, as if I knew how in the first place. He just laughed and told me one way or the other they would take it from me. A few minutes later the door opened and 2 men dressed in riot gear came rushing in. I did my best to fight them off, but in the end there wasn't much I could do. One of them clubbed me over the head and they dragged me out into the hall. They took me into another room and strapped me to a chair before leaving. A while later, Deborah and Gary walked in, followed by several others who formed a circle around us. Gary stood next to me and spoke to everyone. Followers of the light, we've found the gift. Starting tonight, each of you will be given the chance at eternal life. If it is given, so shall it will be received. All of them started chanting those words while Deborah rolled in a pushcart carrying all sorts of cutting utensils and various weapons. Each of them took one of them each, then got back into their spot. Gary pointed to the first person in line, then asked her if she was prepared. Nodding her head, she stepped over to me, clutching a knife in her hand. She repeated the words, "If it's given, so shall it be received," then plunged the knife into my chest. First came the pain, followed by the nauseating sensation of cold steel scraping against bone. It wasn't a cinematic death. There was nothing reflective or cathartic about it. I didn't see my life flash before my eyes or have a moment of clarity. The room around me faded to black and I was suddenly back in that dark space. I could still hear them chanting in the distance. Slowly it dwindled down to just one voice, and after some time a light appeared over my head. When I looked into it, I felt my body restart and gasped for air. As my vision cleared, I could see the woman who stabbed me kneeling in front of me, still chanting. When she saw I was awake, her eyes filled with tears and she got quiet. Silently sobbing, she stood and went to the door. She tapped on it twice, then stepped back and put her head down. When the door opened, Gary walked in carrying a pistol. He glanced over at me, then back to her before raising it and shooting her in the head. He looked at me and smiled. "You can stop all of this by simply giving it to us. Sacrifice yourself for the greater good." I was honestly speechless. I'd never seen anyone die. All I could do was just stare at the body still twitching on the floor. Gary snapped his fingers to get my attention as he stepped closer to me. "This doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to keep going through pain. Release it willingly to those more deserving, and this can all be over." The reality of the situation was, I didn't want to live. If I could have given it to them, I would have, but I didn't know how. Because of that, I sat silently staring at him with a smirk on my face. He grumbled and scowled at me before having the guards take away the body and leading in another person to try their luck. One by one they failed and were executed. Then came Oliver. I know his name because the psycho introduced himself just before starting up a chainsaw and hacking me to bits. Yeah, you heard that right. This freak went Leatherface just like every time before that. I woke up completely healed. The difference was, since old Ollie went apeshit, I wasn't in the chair. When I opened my eyes, he was cowering in the corner, staring wide-eyed at me as I sat up. He stammered out, "I don't understand," and curled up in the fetal position and started chanting. Picking up a hammer one of the others left behind, I tapped twice on the door, then stood off to the side. When Gary stepped in, I cracked him across the skull. He hit the ground, making a sound that'll probably be stuck in my head forever. Moving as fast as I could, I grabbed the gun and made a run for it. When I hit the hall, I realised I was in a house. There were framed pictures on the walls of all the people who'd tried to kill me. At the far end of the walkway, I could see stairs leading down. I glanced back over my shoulder and saw there was a window behind me, but there were bars protecting them from the outside. The moment I moved for the stairs, a door to my left swung open and a guard rushed me. When we slammed into the wall, the gun went off, hitting him in the stomach at point-blank range. He staggered back, then collapsed, gripping his stomach and screaming as the other guard came running up the stairs. When I aimed at him, he stopped and held up his hands. Motioning with the barrel, I directed him back down and followed at a good distance till we were downstairs, not far from the front door. To my left was an empty dining room, but to my right was Deborah and now the guard. They both stood there gawking at me as I peeped out the windows to see several cars parked out front. Turning my attention back to them, I demanded keys. Then it happened again. I suddenly didn't have control of my body. I saw myself pulling the trigger, killing them both, and as they hit the ground, I went back to normal. I froze, standing there, staring at the smoking gun in my hand, as if it had done something it wasn't designed to do. I didn't snap out of it till I caught my reflection in the mirror. I was naked, caked in dried blood and covered with scars. I looked like a nightmare, but I was alive. It took a while to get myself together, but when I did, I cleaned myself up and found some clothes that almost fit. I locked Ollie in that room, then scavenged the house till I found cash and keys, then hit the road. I found out later I'd been in that house for 6 weeks. I don't know who the followers of the light are, but they haven't stopped coming after me. Lucky for me, not being able to die is a great way to make a living. I've been robbing everyone that comes after me. There was this one time in Vegas you just wouldn't believe, but that's a story for another time. I have to be moving along. Texas has gotten a little dangerous these last few years. It's time for me to move again. If I don't get snatched up, I might come back and share some more. Till next time, this is Martin, signing off. Don't forget, if you enjoyed that story, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. I'm sure they really would appreciate it. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to tap the notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Oh, and don't forget to share the video far and wide. This will all help with YouTube's algorithm and will help to promote this channel more. And don't forget to check out the merch store. The link will be in the description and also in the video thumbnail. And if you would like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase and I'll feature it in one of the videos. I now have my very own subreddit community where you can submit any stories you've written. You can submit your stories or encounters either there or send them to cryptidsroost@gmail.com. If you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. All the links are below. I also have a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit, and you'll also find me on Discord. If you would like to support this channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Again, that will also be below. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.